we're accelerating towards something that we can't escape from, because believe it or not, what we're accelerating towards has already happened. It already happened in the future, guys. Two different singularities occurred in our future, and their consequences are so profound that they're rippling back into the past, which is our present, and pulling us towards the two singularities like a magnet. Both singularities have created their own self-sustaining time loop that we're living in. Quantum physics calls it retrocausality, but I mean, I call it destiny. So the two singularities are the technological singularity and the spiritual singularity. And I'm really starting to think that there is no middle ground. As the acceleration continues, people will merge with either the transhumanism of the technological singularity, or they'll merge with the Christ consciousness of the spiritual singularity. It's already happening for some people. Like the transhumanism already is happening on a DNA level through the nanotech and the chemtrails and the CV vax. And it sounds like a crazy movie plot, but the good that can come from that tech singularity the good is that it's actually going to help accelerate the people who refuse to merge with the AI hive mind, to instead merge with Christ consciousness. That's already happening too. Both singularities have already happened. And from a higher perspective, time is an illusion, and everything is actually happening in God's now. It's just that because we're in human form, from our human perspective, to us it appears as though it'll happen in the future, if that makes sense. And I go into greater detail about the time loops and retrocausality in other videos, but I'm trying to make these videos shorter. I'll put a link in the description below if anyone's interested in my videos that go into greater detail about the singularities. But as certain people continue to accelerate towards merging with the technological singularity, you'll see they'll start to become more strange and irrational. Now, on the flip side, as our acceleration towards the spiritual singularity continues, some of us are starting to experience Christ consciousness for short periods of time. Honestly, I think that's the only way we're gonna, I don't want to be melodramatic and say survive this, but the Christ consciousness is allowing us to have purpose and feel a form of love, because there's no love with these people. Like, you can't get love from someone who acts so strange, and just, it's hard to relate to. How do you have a relationship where there's love if you can't relate to them? You know what I mean? But yeah, we are starting to experience Christ consciousness for short periods of time. And that's the only way I can describe it. It's like this wave of indescribable love and bliss that just, it takes away all your worries. Like, it's an actual physical sensation in the body. And as we continue to be pulled toward the spiritual singularity, it's not just our consciousness that's expanding. Our mind is starting to open up, and we're becoming aware of things that we never even noticed before. So I define consciousness as the essence of what we are, and I define mind as the thoughts we think. Our minds are starting to wake up to the retrocausality language that's being used to describe the indescribable. I mean, God and Christ consciousness are so beyond any human words that a different kind of language had to be used to describe it. And I do believe the language that's being used is being communicated to us from the future. Like, it's an actual language that can be heard through the sound waves. And I don't want anyone to take my word for it. Like, I want to give you guys a chance to tune into the language yourself at the end of this video. Basically, this retrocausality language is an intelligent, advanced language that uses many different means of communication. But music and synchronicities seem to be a really big part of it. And what I'm finding is that it's rippling back to us from the future, and it's helping people to connect with Christ consciousness. See, the language is so intelligent, it knows that the best way to try to describe the indescribable is through metaphors and archetypes. It uses a person's level of consciousness to reflect encoded messages. And it's hard to explain when that happens. You just have to experience it yourself. And there's a lot of people in the community who've been getting the messages. Many people are being told about the consciousness arc. So the consciousness arc is a working metaphor for those of us who will experience Christ consciousness when we merge with the spiritual singularity. And the reason I say it was given to us is because it's literally being communicated to us. So bodies of water, rivers, ships, sailing, all of those are common themes used to convey the consciousness arc. There's something in the music, though, that sends these messages. But the thing is, only those people who are open-minded enough to pick up on the language can perceive it. It will never violate your free will and force anyone to tune into the messages. So it's up to us to quiet our mind of all the distractions and tune into it. So the meaning behind the consciousness arc all goes back to the God ocean. Again, Christ consciousness and God are so beyond words that the best we can do is come up with metaphors to describe these things. Now, the ocean is used as a metaphor that represents God. You could think of each person's consciousness or soul as a drop of water within the God ocean. And within that God ocean, there's so much love and joy and just all kinds of wonderful bliss-based emotions that you won't find on this earth. But yeah, when you board the consciousness arc, and I'm talking about symbolically boarding it, it really does feel like you're returning home. All the craziness and frustrations of this world just don't seem to matter anymore when you're on it. And if you can stay on it long enough by quieting your negative thoughts and ignoring the distractions, then your emotional memory of what you really are starts to come back to you. Now, unfortunately, that memory can fade away if we don't stay on board, but it always comes back to you when you get back on the consciousness arc. And what a lot of us are finding is the retrocausality language in the music. It helps us to do that. And it does seem like a growing number of people are starting to experience the retrocausality language of the spiritual singularity firsthand. I want to play a really quick clip of someone who actually started hearing the language over a year before I even started talking about this topic. And I'll put a link to his channel in the description. Now, I don't agree with everything he says, but it's amazing to me how he made a video specifically about the sailing archetype and how he's been hearing the retrocausality language in different songs. And I think what he said about the harvest and farming archetype is key too. So I'm going to play this quick clip from Jeff Snyder 2's channel. Then I want to do an exercise to help you guys tune in to the retrocausality language of the spiritual singularity. That's the best proof you can give yourself. It's through your own direct experience.
But I think there's an underlying meaning to all of that water reference that is in our culture. Financial institutions, currency, money. Are your assets frozen or liquid? Are you underwater on your loan? The bank keeps the currency in the river, just like the bank keeps the currency. There's a lot of water references in our culture. And people have started to track it down and only followed it as far as this idea about maritime law and admiralty law. Myself have tapped into is an underlying meaning, different levels and layers according to your own consciousness and your own ability to understand that there is a deeper level and layer and meaning to all of this water reference. Sailing. I referenced the song Sail by AWOL Nation and the music video, and it was very impactful on me. Had a huge effect on me. Along with the song Sail Away by David Gray. By the way, so when I saw Vanessa VA talking about this same thing, using that particular word, that particular archetype and metaphor that she says is used in so many different places in these songs that it has an underlying meaning here, I chimed in on her comment section and I sent her a link to a video that I made titled Sail. And in that video, I tell you, I had already discovered Sail by AWOL Nation. And I'm looking for the song by Enya called Sail Away, Sail Away, Sail Away. And when I'm looking for it, I find this other song by David Gray. And I'm like, no, that's not a song. Oh, wait a minute. Maybe it is. That's how the Spirit leads you. Life is what happens while we're busy making other plans. So when you're led to something and you think it's not what you were looking for, I said, oh, wait, maybe it is. Sure enough. And I said at the time that this video by David Gray is made for us for this time. And that turned out to be true. You can still listen to the song by David Gray that's like 20 years old, called Sail Away, where it's obviously talking about a relationship with the divine, about the consciousness arc. Like a boat, like Noah's Ark, we're on the consciousness arc according to her. And she uses this in the same way that I have described the consciousness farm. A music video by, it's called Salisbury Hill by Peter Gabriel, where it's showing you the farmer is harvesting the human lettuce. We are on the consciousness farm, and the videography and the words in this music shows that they are depicting the harvest, the holy harvest of the crop of humans that's been planted a long time ago. I had even dropped this song while I was filming a fire one day, showing you the smoke. Out of the blue, I just said, get your bag, son, we're going home. Salisbury Hill, Peter Gabriel, links in the description. And I left it at that. Because the song lyrics are definitely about this harvest. But then yesterday, while the song came on, it might have been a different video. Because he's got a couple different videos to that song. They show, the video starts out with a pair of boots, like a farmer's boots, walking up a hill, and then he starts grabbing heads of lettuce and throwing them in a sack. And by the end of the video, what caught my head and I went, what the hell is that? A lady has a headdress on of lettuce. She's wearing a dress of lettuce. And they attend something like a wedding ceremony. She's like the bride. And along with that, you see a lettuce shredder blowing out shredded lettuce. That's depicting the harvest. And not all the heads of lettuce are ripe, and some of them are rotten. But God can ripen your unripe spots and pluck away your rotten spots. So, listen to the lyrics in the music, and at first it's talking about, get your things, son, I come to take you home. by the end, he says, "You can keep my things. They come to take me home." It's about the harvest. It's depicting humans as lettuce and showing the farmer harvesting the heads of lettuce. There's many other messages in there, but that one doesn't need decoded. That one is blatantly, glaringly obvious even to those who don't have eyes to see.
So that video really resonated with me because around that same time, I discovered a new Mandela effect that directly relates to what he was saying about the harvest and farming archetype. But I'll talk about that more in my next video. Now, I know Jeff said that the Salisbury Hill song is too obvious to need decoding, but I can't help but talk about it because, I mean, the retrocausality language is just so plain to see in that song, just like he said. So there's several lines in that song that transmitted consciousness arc references. The word see, S-E-E, stood out as meaning spiritual sight, while simultaneously taking on the meaning of see, S-E-A, to represent the Christ consciousness that's experienced when we use the consciousness arc to merge with the God ocean. And of course, you know, the word water is in the song, and the wind is mentioned in the song too. And we already talked about in multiple videos how the wind got decoded as an archetype that represents adversity and negativity. Now, even though the wind can represent all kinds of personal struggles, I also think the wind is symbolic of the technological singularity. And I think the reason why the wind is brought up so much in songs is because the spiritual singularities, I think it's trying to warn us about the tech singularity. I've lost count of how many songs mention wind. And that's what you'll find with the retrocausality language. It's very intelligent. You'll see repeating themes and archetypes in multiple songs with different artists, different genres. Like the songs that came out decades apart from each other will give the exact same messages. It's kind of strange. But I think the wind of the tech singularity can actually be used to motivate us to get that much closer to God. Because if you think about it, the wind can be used as a destructive force that causes things like hurricanes and tornadoes, but it's that same air that allows us to breathe and gives us life. And we can use the chaos of the wind to strengthen our connection to God and go sailing on the consciousness arc. And when I say we, I'm just talking about the small group of people who will merge with the spiritual singularity instead of the technological singularity. But there's lots of root archetypes in this song, like the words up, on, by, out. The words by and out got changed to mean basically saying goodbye to a lower state of consciousness. And the word up morphed into representing a higher state of consciousness that's closer to God. And you know, as the spiritual singularity continues to accelerate, we'll experience more waves of higher states of consciousness where we do feel closer to God. I can promise you that. It'll be like a tsunami of love or something. And I know the Christ consciousness waves seem to come and go kind of quickly sometimes, but the duration and intensity is going to start to increase along with our memory of them. Now, I think a big part of that is making an effort to turn our mind on, so to speak, in order to open up our perception to the retrocausality language of the spiritual singularity. And the song even mentions the word on. The retrocausality language will never violate your free will and force you to hear the messages, though. So If you choose to close your mind to it, then you won't hear it. It's not like the retrocausality of the technological singularity that tries to force itself into people's awareness. The song also mentions, and I'm not going to decode the whole song because I don't want this video to be too long, but there's a line in the song that says, quote, "Time stood still," unquote. Now this line could mean time stopping, so like linear time coming to an end, which is yet another reference to retrocausality and the language trying to convey the nature of time to us. Now for me, that line also stood out as having a second meaning. Somehow the word stood got transformed to mean both a verb and a noun, when its meaning became taking a stand, to stand with God. Like these codes, I'm telling you, these codes come into your mind as fast as a thought pops into your head. That's why I always say, we gotta slow down and focus on God when we listen to the music, because if we don't, we won't catch the messages. They just come so fast. And then of course we already talked about in many other videos how the homophone night and night get used a lot in songs. Now in previous videos, it seemed like one form of night took precedence over the other, but in this song both forms of night seem to ring true as being equally accurate in this song, if that makes sense. Because the song talks about flying out of the night, N-I-G-H-T, which represents a time when almost everyone is asleep or spiritually blind to the spiritual singularity. So it's about flying out or leaving that state of being asleep spiritually. And then the other meaning of night, K-N-I-G-H-T, also makes sense if we think of night as like a knight of God or warrior of God. So when the K-N-I-G-H-T meaning is applied, the lyrics talk about flying out and leaving that state of being asleep or spiritually blind, because we are like a knight of God or warrior of God. So both forms of the homophone kind of stuck out in this word or in this song. But the song also mentions the homophone no, N-O, which morphed into the word know, K-N-O-W, which for me, because I can only speak for myself, for me that word stood out as meaning like an inner knowing. Also, the homophone win, W-H-E-N, got changed to win, W-I-N, to show a retrocausality reference about how we've already won the spiritual war. See, that's how I know the retrocausality language is being communicated to us from what humans call the future, because it's only from a perspective rooted in the apparent future that someone would know that something has already been won. And I say what humans call the future because from our linear human perspective, it appears to us that the singularities and the winning of the spiritual war haven't happened yet. But really, everything is happening in God's now. God's eternity, I don't think it isn't time that goes on forever and ever. I think God's eternity is actually the absence of time. And like I said, I'm not going to decode the whole song, but there's a line in the song that mentions, quote, "I did not believe the information." And that stood out to me as talking about the fact that there's a whole group of us. It's a small group, but nonetheless, there's a group of us who don't believe the mainstream's information that's rooted in the materialism paradigm. We just don't believe it anymore. And there's also a line that says, quote, "Till I thought of what I'd say." Now, as weird as this sounds, till apostrophe T-I-L instantly took on the meaning of till T-I-L-L, as in something that you use to till crops. And what's funny is the whole verse actually makes more sense with that version of till, T-I-L-L, because the very next line literally says, quote, which connection I should cut, unquote, as in cutting or pruning a crop. Like I couldn't make this stuff up. Guys, it's a reference to the harvest, the separation of the wheat and tares. This is exactly what Jeff was talking about. And it gives me the chills, y'all. It really does, because this Mandela effect that I just found directly relates to this. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm gonna have to talk about that in my next video. And I'm almost done with the decoding, then I'll play the song for you guys. But real quick, the song mentions the word one, and not one W-O-N, but one O-N-E, which stood out as a reference to God or source. And the song also mentions the word day, which represents a time of spiritual awakening. And you know, that root archetype is in multiple songs. If you turn on the radio and listen to it right now for an hour or two, you'd probably hear that archetype many times. The word machinery was used as a metaphor for the matrix, aka the inorganic lower collective consciousness that dominates this earth and tries to program us. The last thing I want to decode before I play the song is the line that says, quote, who close their eyes, unquote. For me, the word close morphed into not meaning to shut closed, but to mean being physically close to someone. So the who close part turned into a question. It kind of came across as source asking who's close, and then that question got answered with the very next sentence that says their eyes, meaning God's close to us because we're his eyes. Kind of like how you hear some people say we're God's feet. It's kind of that premise. We're so close to him that we're a part of his body. So there is no separation. There's only a temporary forgetting of what we really are in this realm while we're here in this realm. And I know some people, for some people that meaning may come off as sounding kind of like egotistical, but I think these lyrics are more so about love than anything else. It was kind of like God saying he's so close to us that he can use us to see through our eyes. And he knows what we see, think, and feel, because there's no separation. Like there's no separation. And you know, what I'm finding is a lot of times the retrocausality language in songs will use questions to encourage us to use our free will to tune into the answer. And you know, only you can decide if you want to tune into the spiritual singularity codes or not. So even though by definition retrocausality implies determinism, we still have to make an effort. We still have to make an effort to put in the spiritual work, so to speak. So we don't get to decide if we merge with the spiritual singularity, because it's already happened. It's already attracting us to it like a magnet pulling at something. However, we do have to use our free will to decide when we tune into the retrocausality language. It's up to us to decide when we focus our awareness on God. I mean, God is always there in the background. We wouldn't exist if that weren't the case. But we need to use our free will to choose to focus our attention on God's presence. That's why there's so many distractions in the world, and why the Matrix is constantly trying to condition or program our mind. So I define mind as the thoughts we think, and I define consciousness as the essence of what we are. Consciousness is awareness, and the mind acts as a filter that the information has to pass through before it can come into our conscious awareness. But Keep in mind the retrocausality language is trying to describe the indescribable. So there will be times when it won't always follow what we call proper grammar. And keep in mind too, the retrocausality language, well, it uses many things, but one of the big things it uses is archetypes to reflect your own spiritual evolution. That's how two people can hear the same song and get different messages. But just make sure you're looking at the screen. That way you can see the lyric changes I highlighted as you're listening to the song, just to emphasize the retrocausality codes. And just use this time to slow down and focus on God. So take a moment to clear your mind of all the distractions and negative thoughts, and just focus on God's love. And really ask yourself, God, if you could send me a message or a sign through this song, what would you want to tell me about?
On Salisbury Hill, I could see the city light. Wind was blowing, time stood still. Eagle flew out of the night. He was something to observe. Came in close, I heard a voice, standing, stretching every nerve. I had to listen, had no choice. I did not believe the information, just had to trust imagination. My heart going boom, boom, boom. Son, he said, grab your things, I've come to take you home. Yeah, don't fool you. To keep in silence, I resigned. My friends would think I was a nut, turning water into wine. Open doors would soon be shut. So I went from day to day. My life was in a rut, till I thought of what I'd say, which connection I should cut. I was feeling part of the scenery. I walked right out of the machinery. My heart going boom, boom, boom. Hey, he said, grab your things, I'm gonna take you home. Hey, back home. When illusions spin a